Balin stood on the razor's edge of Highcrest Ridge as dawn's first pale light seeped through the swirling mist, her breath steaming in clouds against the chill. Below her, the valley floor lay hidden beneath gray shadows, an endless expanse of pine and rock, scored by silver streams. Each of her cloven hooves rested upon a pinprick of purchase, a sliver of granite so narrow that only the mountain's most sure-footed could traverse it. The wind's sharp whisper pressed against her sides, threatening to shove her from the precipice into the yawning abyss. Yet Balin, matriarch of her herd, for longer than the youngest ibex could remember, moved with the calm assurance of ancient stone. Far below, in a sheltered hollow carpeted with dew-dark heather, a lone figure quivered. A fawn no older than a morning's hours, its spotted coat damp and flecked with soil. The fawn's mother had vanished at the crack of a distant rifle shot, fleeing into the forest's safety and inadvertently leaving her offspring exposed to the mountain's hazards. Now, frozen with fear, the fawn peered up at the sheer cliffs that hemmed it in, ears flattened to its skull, wide eyes reflecting the pale glow of dawn. Balin's nostrils flared as a faint tremor of distress reached her across the vertical expanse. She reared on her hind legs and sniffed. There, carried on the thin mountain air, was the sweet, musky scent of a vulnerable heart. Leaving the narrow path behind, she descended with powerful bounds, each leap a controlled arc that defied gravity's claim. Her horns, curved like polished silver blades, caught the light as she dropped down to a sloping ledge barely wider than her shoulders. From there, she looked across the chasm that separated her world of sheer rock faces from the fawn's meadow of trembling survival. For a heartbeat, predator and rescuer regarded one another, the fawn trembling amidst heather, Balin poised like a living bridge between sky and earth. Then, with the gentlest of bleats, a low, resonant hum that carried reassurance through the thin air, Balin began her final descent. She slid down a chute of packed snow, hooves carving tiny terraces in the ice, and landed in the meadow's edge with the grace of a falling leaf. The fawn, startled at the sudden appearance of this towering silver form, blinked once. Then, recognizing safety in the matriarch's calm gaze, rose unsteadily to its spindly legs. Thus, with the mountain's dawn as their silent witness, Balin and her unlikely charge met at the boundary of two worlds. Behind them, Highcrest Ridge loomed, its jagged crown softened by mist, and before them lay a narrow path carved into the crags above, the only road back to safety, and the beginning of an impossible rescue against every law of nature. Balin's massive form loomed over the trembling fawn as dawn's pale light spilled across the heather-strewn meadow. With a gentle nudge of her muzzle, she guided the fawn to the base of a narrow gully carved by last season's melting snows. The gully's smooth walls rose like the keel of an upturned ship, slick with patches of ice and frost-etched rock. Balin tested the slope with a tentative hoof, before planting her weight firmly and pulling herself upward in a series of fluid, arching steps. Behind her, the fawn, its slender legs still wobbly, hesitated at the gully's mouth. Balin turned, low bleat urging, and lowered her head so the fawn could press against her chest for stability. Carefully, the fawn placed a foreleg onto Balin's flank, then another, its small hooves slipping until Balin's wide back offered a secure foothold. Like a living ladder, Balin allowed the fawn to clamber onto her shoulders, mane brushing its soft belly, then sprang up the gully's first ledge in a single bound, heart pounding beneath her thick coat. The gully narrowed into a twisting chimney, the walls closing in until only a sliver of sky winked overhead. Balin ducked her horned head and pressed close to the rock, her sides flexing as she inched upward on tiny footholds. The fawn perched upon her shoulders, ears flattened but eyes wide with wonder, trusting Balin's sure-footed guidance. Each pull of her powerful legs carried them past loose stones that tumbled away into darkness, and every moment the air grew thinner, colder, charged with the promise of peril. When the chimney opened onto a hair-thin ledge 50 feet above the meadow, Balin paused, hoof poised on a patch of slick granite. She felt the wind's icy fingers probing for weakness. heard the distant call of an eagle disturbed by their passage. Then, with a decisive leap, she vaulted onto the ledge, bringing the fawn safely to solid ground. There, at the edge of the world, predator and prey shared a heartbeat of silent awe. Two lives bound by the narrow carve of survival before the long skyline stretched out, and their harrowing climb towards safety continued beneath the awakening mountains. Balin's heart thundered as she led the fawn across the hair-thin ledge, each confident hoofbeat ringing against the granite. Behind them, the gully's yawning depths yawned in silent threat, and the wind's howl tugged at their flanks. Yet Balin pressed forward, pausing only to glance back and ensure her passenger remained steady. Ahead, the ledge gave way to a jutting fin of rock that sloped steeply toward the ridge's spine, a sheer scramble she had once charted in her youth. She bounded up the slope, digging her hooves into the frost-hardened stone until the fawn's trembling legs could follow. At the crest, the morning sun broke free of cloud-masked sky, illuminating a narrow path etched into the mountain's shoulder above the swirling mists. Here, the path narrowed to less than a goat's breadth, carved by centuries of wind and the hooves of Balin's ancestors. Below, the world fell away into an abyss of swirling snow. Above, jagged peaks pierced the sky's pale expanse. Balin lowered her shoulders, flattening herself against the rock to offer the fawn maximum stability. With a gentle bleat, she urged it forward. The fawn pawed carefully at the narrow shelf, ears flicking as it gained confidence with each cautious step. Halfway along the spine, the wind shifted, driving stinging flurries sideways into their faces. Balin positioned herself as a living shield, her broad back warding off the worst of the gusts. The fawn pressed close behind, muzzle nuzzling the warmth of her flank. Inch by inch, they pressed on until the path turned toward a small alcove deep within the mountain's ribs, a haven Balin had discovered long ago, hidden from both storm and predator. Emerging from the gale's fury, Balin led the fawn into the alcove's sheltering curve. The wind's roar dimmed to a distant murmur, and the fawn exhaled in trembling relief. Balin pressed her muzzle to the youngster's forehead in a gesture of comfort, her silver horns gleaming with frost. Around them, the mountain exhaled in silence, and for a fleeting moment, predator and charge shared the hush of sanctuary high above the valley's dangers. Proof that together, with courage and cunning, they could conquer even the most treacherous heights. From the safety of the wind-sheltered alcove, Balin allowed the fawn a moment to steady trembling legs and catch its breath. The mist that had torn at their faces now curled harmlessly around the alcove's polished walls. Ahead lay the ridge's broad spine, a plateau of broken scree and frost-crusted stones that sloped gradually toward the mountain's summit. Balin rose, hooves ringing on the rock floor, and turned to the fawn, bleating softly. Their journey was not yet done. They emerged onto the plateau, where the snow lay thin and patchy, revealing fields of loose scree that shifted with every step. Balin demonstrated. She planted her weight upon a cluster of firm stones, testing each for stability before proceeding. The fawn imitated her, careful paws pressing gently until each rock held fast, teaching it that solid ground could be found amid chaos, if one only learned to seek it. Far ahead, the peak's sharp silhouette pierced the pale sky. Between them and that final goal lay two deep crevasses, knife-edge cracks that split the plateau like lightning scars. Balin climbed to the first, sniffing its jagged rim, then danced backward to bring the fawn alongside. With a soft snort of encouragement, she leaped effortlessly across the narrow chasm, her horns cutting a brilliant arc against the light. The fawn, heart hammering, gathered its courage and bounded in kind, landing with a soft rumble of scree that slid harmlessly into the abyss below. At the second crevasse, wider and more ominous, Balin paused. She sidled along its rim, nostrils flaring as she located a slender snow bridge, a fragile platter of hardened drift stretching across the gap. Demonstrating once more, she tested its weight, then stepped lightly across, The fawn advanced, each paw placement precise and deliberate, until it stood trembling on the far edge, eyes gleaming with triumph. Beyond these final hazards lay the wind-scoured summit plateau, a realm of crystalline snowfields and panoramic vistas. As Balin led the fawn across that last stretch, the first pink glow of sunrise brushed the eastern horizon, setting the world aflame in pastels of rose and gold. Below them, the valley floor lay vast and silent, a quilt of shadow and frost. And there, at the journey's end, predator and charge stood side by side, a silver-horned guide and a brave young fawn, victors of the mountain's cruel maze, united by a bond stronger than fear and more enduring than the tallest peak. Balin and the fawn lingered atop the summit plateau as the pale sun climbed into a perfect sky, the world laid out in a panorama of jagged peaks and shadowed valleys. Each breath they drew was thin with altitude, and the cold bit at their fur. Yet beneath the beauty lay the final test, descending the far shoulder of the mountain, a steep sweep of loose scree that led back toward the safety of the alpine meadow below. Balin moved first, sliding her hooves into the scree with a practiced grace that sent tiny avalanches tumbling behind her. The fawn watched, heart pounding, until Balin paused and nickered encouragement. Then, with trembling resolve, the fawn stepped onto the scree slope and began its controlled descent, legs spread wide for balance, hooves catching on each small stone. Balin followed close behind, nudging aside larger rocks with her snout to clear a safer path. Halfway down, the scree gave way to a hidden band of solid rock, an unexpected outcrop that rose like an island amid the sliding stones. Balin led the fawn around its base, demonstrating how to skirt its sharp edges rather than clamber over them and risk a fall. The fawn crouched low and edged around the rock, chest heaving, before rejoining Balin on the slope's gentler gradient. Below them, the meadow's green carpet beckoned, its gentle swell a promise of soft grass and shelter. Yet, between safe ground and the plateau, lay a final treacherous gully, a V-shaped cut in the mountain's flank, filled with powdery snow that masked jagged stones beneath. Balin halted at its rim and lowered her head so the fawn could follow her gaze. With a swift, sure-footed leap, she crossed the gully, landing in the snow's hidden center. She stamped her hoof to test the depth, then bounded upward to the far rim in a single, confident movement. The fawn hesitated, legs quivering, then summoned every ounce of trust in Balin's lead. With a small, plaintive bleat, it leaped into the snow, a feathery plunge that sent powder spraying like diamonds in the sunlight. The fawn's claws found hidden ledges beneath the snow's surface, and it climbed the far rim with growing confidence until it stood again beside Balin on solid ground. Together they trotted the final stretch down the mountain's footpath, a ribbon of worn earth that led beneath larch and dwarf birch. The meadow's flowers, edelweiss, blue gentian, and tufted saxifrage, swayed in a gentle breeze, greeting the pair like old friends. The fawn pranced forward, its earlier terror transformed into playful relief, and Balin watched with maternal pride. Reaching the meadow's heart, where fresh streams bubbled over polished stones, Balin nuzzled the fawn one last time. The morning's epic climb was behind them, replaced now by the simple rhythms of life at the mountain's base. The fawn's tentative sips of cold water, the rustle of grass under careful hooves, and the echo of Balin's low bleat carried on the mountain air, a song of triumph, trust, and the unbreakable bond forged on a death-defying ridgewalk. By midday, the sun had warmed the alpine meadow into a gentle haven, and Balin led the fawn to a sheltered hollow beneath a stand of stunted larches. Here, the grasses grew tall and sweet, and a trickle of meltwater formed a clear pool. Balin dipped her muzzle to drink, then lifted her head and demonstrated a stealthy stalk. She lowered her body, ears forward, and inched through the grass toward a cluster of plump alpine voles, rummaging at the edge of the clearing. The fawn watched, wide-eyed, and Balin nickered encouragement. Then she bounded forward in a sudden, graceful pounce, only to find the voles darting safely into their burrow. It was not the kill she sought, but the lesson of patience and timing. The fawn crouched, mimicking her stance, and in that stillness glimpsed the world anew. The ripple of grass, the twitch of tiny noses, the soft murmur of wind through needles. Balin rewarded the fawn with a gentle nudge, and together they traced the edge of the pool, nipping at tender shoots and sipping cool water. As the afternoon light softened, a shape loomed on the meadow's far edge. A lone doe returned at last, her graceful form emerging through the wildflowers. She froze at the sight of Balin and her pup, eyes bright with relief and gratitude. With a soft bleat of recognition, the fawn bounded toward its mother, legs shaking with joy, and the doe lowered her head in tender nuzzle. Balin watched this reunion with calm satisfaction. Her rescue complete, her pupil returned to the circle of its own kind. In that luminous meadow, predator and prey stood side by side under the high sun, bound by an unlikely bond of courage and compassion. Balin turned then, lifting her head to the distant peaks, knowing that the ridge's call would come again. But for now, her heart was full. She had crossed the death-defying chasms, outwitted the storm, and taught a fragile fawn the ways of the wild, lessons that would echo in the high places of the mountain long after the day's warmth had faded. As the sun dipped toward the western peaks, the meadow's golden light deepened into honeyed dusk. The doe and fawn slipped away into the sheltering grove of larches, reunited at last, while Balin lingered at the edge of the field, her silver horns gleaming in the fading glow. Around her, the valley's chorus, crickets, distant ptarmigan calls, the sigh of wind through alpine grasses, rose in gentle farewell to the day. Balin paused at the boundary, where meadow yielded to mountain trail, lifting her head to inhale the crisp evening air. She felt the soft rumble of her heart still echo the day's trials. The bitter gale, the treacherous ridges, the narrow escapes that had tested every ounce of her ancient cunning. Beside her, the fawn watched with bright eyes, now steady on its feet, ears flicking at the hush of approaching night. With a low, soft bleat, a memento of their shared journey, Balin beckoned the fawn forward, guiding it back toward the winding path that would lead her home. Together they traced the rocky footpath beneath long shadows, each careful step a testament to the lessons learned in high places. Balin paused at each hidden hollow, each ancient cairn built of stacked stones, and nuzzled the fawn in gentle reassurance. The little one, once trembling at the mist-shrouded abyss, now walked with quiet confidence, nose lifted to the sense of home. When they reached the herd's grazing slope, where younger kids frolicked and elders grazed beneath pines, Balin lifted her head in a soft, triumphant call. The herd's response was immediate. Gentle bleats and rustling hooves converged as family circled around their matriarch and her protege. The fawn turned to Balin, pressing its flank in gratitude, and Balin dipped her horns in a motherly nod, welcoming the reunion. Under the first stars of night, Balin settled among her herd. The fawn nestled close to its mother, but always within her watchful gaze. Above, the peaks stood silent against the velvet sky, witnesses to a rescue that would become legend among mountain dwellers. And as the herd drifted off to rest, hooves shifting in warm earth, soft breaths rising in unison, Balin closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that courage, cunning, and an unbreakable bond had turned the death-defying ridgewalk into a story of hope, passed in the hush of alpine nights for generations yet to come.